Good morning, everybody. My name is Viola Scafonati. Welcome to this event on dealing with the complexities of teaching ethics to future computer professionals. Okay, let me just share with you some rules. I guess this is the most important part. We are going to record this event. So that's very important, and it's very important that you know that we are recording. So then you can ask questions and you can write them in the chat box, or you can raise your electronic hand in Zoom if you want to use your microphone. Okay, so this event is jointly organized by Informatics Europe and the European project Ethics for EU. So let me just having Enrico Nardelli, who is Informatics Europe president, presenting in few words Informatics Europe and its mission. So please, Enrico.
Thanks, Viola. And welcome to everybody attending this meeting, and welcome to our partners in this important European project on ethics for computer science or informatics. We are really grateful to the coordinator of this project and the other partners for having proposed us to participate to this project a few years ago, because we feel that the issue of ethics and more in general the social responsibility of our discipline is highly important, and therefore train our students, educate our students to be aware of this issue is definitely an important goal for the future of our discipline. You may know that Informatics Europe is an association of European academic department of informatics and Industrial Research Lab, and we were born 16 years ago, more or less, in 2006. And we now group about around 150 departments all over Europe, covering more than 30 countries. And our mission is to have a single strong voice for the informatics community in Europe. And our strength is given by the number of our members. Therefore, we are constantly asking people to join the association, because the more we are, the louder will be our voice in Brussels, where when issues are discussed at the European level, but will help also in each country the local community to be heard better when issues regarding policies are discussed at the national level. So we are growing year after year, and we are happy to have all of you here in this event that we are co-organizing with the other partners of this project. Have a nice event. I will stop here because I don't want to steal you more time than I already had, and have a good day of work.
Thank you very much, Enrico. You can see the program. There are some last-minute changes, but we will have a first part and then a break and then a panel. And before introducing the first speaker, let me just say that this is a very the topic that we are going to discuss today is very important, is up to date in these days. Here, ethics has to be meant at large. It's not just a small subfield of philosophy. Ethics means to consider all the moral and social issues that are related to informatics or computer science. And it's true that many progresses, in particular in the last year, have been made. Many things have changed, but still there are a lot of issues to cover, to discuss. And our idea is that it's very important to discuss and to deal with these issues, adopting different perspectives. So that's one of the core elements of this European project, Ethics for EU, but this is also a core element of the way in which we have organized this event this morning. So the goal is to try to cover at least some of the challenges today and to address these challenges adopting different perspectives that will be covered by our excellent speaker. So our first speaker today is Dipna O'Sullivan, who is in charge of the Ethics for EU project. So she will say something more about the project and the details of this project. She's a senior lecturer and assistant head of school at the School of Computer Science at Technical University, Dublin. Her research interests are in the area of health informatics, in particular in the design, development, and evaluation of decision support system to support clinician and patient decisions making. And of course, this work involves research across many different aspects of the domain, including electronic and personal health records, machine learning, intelligent algorithm, explainable AI, and so on. So, Dipna, I will unshare my screen. You can share your screen, and you have approximately 20 minutes, and then we will have plenty of space for questions. Okay?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Viola. Thank you for that.
Okay, everything is fine.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm not sure. I can't, for some reason, change my slides. Let me see. I'm going to have to go again. It's always the computer scientist that has the problem with Zoom on these. There we go. That's working?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Viola. So thanks to Viola and the entire team at Informatics Europe for organizing this event today. We're absolutely delighted to be able to share with the audience today some of the work that we've been doing on the Ethics for You project. So the Ethics for You project, we're about 18 months into it now, and it's an Erasmus Plus transnational project. And we're exploring the issues around teaching ethics in computer science and related discipline. I use the word computer science throughout this presentation, but we recognize, that computer science is a broad domain. It's obviously in Europe more frequently known as perhaps informatics. And we're really talking about, any of those courses or programs that we would see as being related to those domains that would compose a pretty strong computing type component. So the objective of the EU Ethics for You project is to develop new curricula, best practices and learning resources for teaching ethics to computer science and students from related disciplines. I'm going to go through what we mean by, and demonstrate some of what we mean by new curricula, best practices, and learning resources over the course of this talk. And what we're proposing is we're following a train the trainer model. So this project is about developing resources for faculty, for lecturers who will be delivering ethics content to computer science students. So our target audience in that sense are faculty and lecturers. So as well as developing the resources, the curricula and so on, we're developing instructor guides that should aid computer science lecturers in delivering this kind of content to their students. So as I said, it's a transnational partnership. TU Dublin, Technological University Dublin, are the lead partner in this. We're leading it, and we're delighted to be joined by our partners below, Informatics Europe, of course, who are organizing the event today, Institut Mines Telecom or Telecom Sud Paris in France, Maldarlan, Högskola in Sweden, and the European Digital Learning Network from Italy. Excuse me. So let me just, I need to see my screen a little bit better. So what are the issues, I suppose, around teaching ethics to computer science students? So despite the many ways, I suppose, that new technologies have emerged to improve life, they can't be regarded, I suppose, as unanimously beneficial or even at best value neutral. And recent experiences, and it seems like every day there's a new sort of scandal in the media or the newspaper that's showing that some of these smart systems, AI systems, computer systems have been poorly designed essentially, and they've led to unintended and often harmful consequences. So when we are educating our students, we want them to think not only about, oh, can I build that system? What's involved in building that system? But to go back a step and say, well, should the system be built at all, or should this system be built to the spec that's been outlined here? And some of the things that we want them to think about, are the different types of consequences of a system, a product, or even a feature. So things around, what are the intended or the unintended consequences of a product or feature of a system? What are the positive consequences that will come out from a system like this? But then are there consequences that we haven't thought about yet and that we might want to mitigate? And to that extent, we're inspired by a framework of consequence scanning. So we believe in this idea of sort of purposely inserting some friction into the product or the design development process with the goal of mitigating negative or unintended consequences of these smart systems. So the objectives then of the Ethics for You project, and I'll go through each of these in detail throughout the rest of the presentation. So the first objective was to identify gaps in computer science lecturers, educators' knowledge of ethics, and we've done a very comprehensive survey on that, and I'll talk briefly through the results of that. We want to develop a common understanding of pan-European values in ethics for technology, to understand the landscape across Europe in ethics for computer science. The key, I suppose, outputs of this project are going to be a repository of open and accessible online curricula. And these will include sort of teaching materials, assessment materials, in-class activities, and other supporting materials to support the teaching of ethics to computer science students. To accompany the open repository of curricula, we will produce guidelines and instructor guides for teaching ethics to computer science students. And we feel this is particularly important because as the results of our survey showed, and just from our own sort of knowledge in the area, that ethics is often taught by people coming from a very technical background who may not be quite used to teaching a topic such as ethics. So in a way, I think many of computer science instructors need a little help in how to teach ethics to computer science students. We want to develop a sustainable European community of practice in computer science ethics, and certainly the event today is really the beginning of this community of practice. We're very aware of, sort of a project runs for 3 years, it ends. We don't want that type of an output from this kind of project. We really want to bring together people who are interested in this topic, people who can contribute, and bring that into a community of practice, which can be a very live and exciting topic area. And then we want to develop an online training program through a previous Erasmus Plus project. We developed what's called a global labs model, and we wanted to deliver an online training program for computer science lecturers in the instructions of ethics. So I'm going to go through each of these objectives. Each objective in the project is called an intellectual output. And I'll talk through, the ones that we've completed, the ones that are in progress, and those that are planned. So the first intellectual output was a research report on European values in ethics and technology. And this consisted of 2 parts. The first part was a literature review. And in that we discussed the origins of digital ethics, I suppose recent views from EU working groups on digital ethics. We also looked at geographical perceptions of digital ethics, and also provided a summary of pertinent digital ethics topics and challenges in an increasingly interconnected ICT world. The second part of the report presented the results of focus groups that we conducted with 3 key groups of stakeholders. They were academics, industry specialists, and citizens. And the analysis captured their analysis with regards to ethical concerns they have about new technologies, the skills or training future computer professionals should have to protect themselves in the online world, and who should be responsible for teaching digital ethics. So the report contains a number of values extracted from both the literature and the focus group sessions that can be used as guidelines by computer science lecturers and educators in the development and the delivery of ethics content. And this report is available from the Ethics for EU website, and I've given the link to it there. The second output of the project that has been completed so far is a research report on existing competencies in the teaching of ethics for computer science. So this report presents the results of a survey of over 16 institutions across Europe, and they were a blend of, I suppose, more traditional institutions and Europe type technological university type institutions. And we focused on a number of key questions in this report. We looked at whether or not ethics is taught in computer science at each of the institutions, the reasons why ethics is or isn't taught, how it's taught, the background of the staff who teach ethics, and the scope of the computer science ethics curricula. And I'm going to very, briefly, as I say, you can download the result and the report and see the results there. I've given the link, but very briefly, some of the results we got from the survey were that 2/3 of the institutions that we surveyed taught ethics, but 1/3 did not, which is quite a very substantial minority who don't teach ethics. When ethics isn't taught, the most common reasons cited are a lack of staff availability and expertise. And we found that most of the people who teach ethics come from a technical background as opposed to an ethics background. Ethics is often taught as a standalone subject rather than integrated into other modules. And most institutions devote a relatively small number of hours to teaching ethics in their computer science or related programs. 67% of the institutions surveyed teach 10 hours or less per semester. And then what was really interesting, I think, was ethics was considered most important for particular topics. Obviously, things like artificial intelligence, intelligence systems, security, natural language processing came top of our list. But it was considered least important in topics we found very surprising. So issues around computer vision, pervasive computing, scientific computing, soft simulation and modeling, where we would have thought, ethics is extremely important in these issues, but is not being commonly taught there. So today I'm going to mostly focus on our intellectual outputs that are in progress. What we have been focusing on for the last number of months is on developing an open and accessible online repository. And that contains online curricula, teaching and assessment resources to support the teaching of ethics to computer science students. So we're delivering a set of teaching materials, and they're centered on case studies. And case studies, I suppose, that, have from the literature, but we take a very broad view of what the literature is. We look at case studies that are reported in the academic literature, but also those that are reported in the media and those kind of well-known case studies, which we think will be engaging for students. So each set of teaching materials is developed according to the following structure. We have some delivery notes or some guidance. There's a set of lecture slides. There's some sample assessments. There's in-class activities, take-home activities, a set of related research papers, and then any other related materials or case studies that are linked or relevant for that particular topic. So just a quick aside on why we decided to use case studies for teaching ethics. So, many other fields, research has shown that case-based instruction really increases a student understanding of ethical issues, and it sort of helps them in that kind of reasoning process. And we believe that the use of these kind of case studies provides particularly computer science students with an opportunity to recognize dilemmas, to employ kind of a moral imagination by promoting this active learning and requiring them to assume the role of participants in the decision-making process. So to put themselves in different roles, but to put themselves in the role of a user of the system, in the role of somebody working in the software company, and so on. And we're also very much interested, as I say, in a distributed pedagogy approach. From our survey, we found that computer ethics is often taught as a standalone subject. And that's kind of, in spite of evidence that infusing ethics across the computer science curriculum gives students a better understanding of the ethical impacts and the possible harmful effects of the technologies that they implement. So this distributed pedagogy approach reinforces the message that ethical reasoning is part of what you do as a computer science, and embedding ethics across the curriculum helps them see how the ethical issues can arise from many contexts. And we also very much believe that our case studies should be reusable or adaptable across many topics. So, case studies that are related to privacy should be perhaps reusable in AI modules, Internet of Things modules, programmer interface design modules. And the case study approach allows us to have that modular view. So here are some of the case studies that we've been developing as part of the project, where most of these are at now a very advanced stage and are being evaluated this semester with students, and this term is just coming to an end. So we're really starting to gather the data and evaluating these with faculty and with students. We've given these a kind of a primary heading here: computer programming, software testing, social media ethics, and so on. But many of them, as I say, that's the primary heading. They fit into some of the other categories as well. So some of the case studies we've been looking at in around computer programming, like many, I suppose, many countries, state exams were cancelled in 2020, and students were given a calculated grade. And in Ireland, we had a badly designed algorithm that miscomputed the exam marks. The code wasn't sufficiently tested, and that contained errors that downgraded student marks. So that's a very nice one, and we've actually just finished running that with our first year students who've come in and who are actually, I suppose, a victim in some ways of that algorithm. We're looking at some of the issues around Google. We have a case study around Google Autocompletes. This was an error in Google's PageRank algorithm, or I suppose a flaw more so than an error that allowed it to be manipulated. And its autocomplete function therefore prioritized websites, for example, that declared, climate change is a hoax, the Sandy Hook mass shooting never happened, and how that, again, how that flaw was allowed to sort of perpetuate in a system like Google. Very interested in Google's search bias. The first image I have there is the first 5 image results you get if you type the word professor into Google, as you can see, all male and all rather elderly. And it's, what we're trying to teach students here is that, certain biases, in this case, particularly gender bias, it's coded into search algorithms. This bias has come from the language that's taught to algorithms. We have a number of case studies in software testing. Of course, the Volkswagen emission scandal is one we're looking at, where Volkswagen intentionally programmed diesel engines to activate their emissions only during laboratory testing. And this discussion really in this case study is on the topic of software controlled machinery and how it's generally more prone to cheating. In terms of social media, I mean, we put it under social media ethics, but this could come, I suppose, under a lot of telecommunication ethics. We're looking at cyber harassment. And in this particular case study, we're looking at online trolling and harassment, and particularly how it affects women, and whether social media companies have an obligation to protect their users. In terms of the Internet of Things, we've developed a case study on or smart pills. These are smart pills that contain a silicon chip that will relay information then back to a wearable device or a patch, and give feedback to the user, which is of course also connected up via Bluetooth on your mobile phone and so on. So some of the ethical issues here we're looking at are around the third-party monitoring of health, affordability, and again, device malfunction and the ethics around that. So again, software testing would be seen as an important one of the discipline in this one too. There are many case studies, obviously, in AI and machine learning. We kind of feel, you know, one of the things I think in the Ethics for EU project we've discussed is that it feels sometimes like when people talk about ethics in computer science, they're only talking about AI and machine learning. And we're very conscious that we want to broaden out the topics beyond AI and machine learning to some of the other topics that I was speaking about previously. But we do have a number of case studies in here. We have developed a case study on autonomous vehicles, and Gordana, who will be speaking on the panel later, has just finished delivering this to her students. And really what we're looking here at are how, you know, complex driving tasks are being successively replaced by advanced driving assistant systems. And of course, this was in the news just this week, where Tesla crashed in the Californian desert and it killed two, and the car may have been on autopilot. Online exam proctoring has really come to the fore during the COVID crisis, where many students are now completing examinations from their own private spaces, their bedrooms and so on, and been forced to turn on their cameras in these kind of private spaces. And so there are issues there, of course, around AI, but also, you know, around privacy. The PULSE algorithm is another very well-known one. It's also sometimes known as the White Obama algorithm. And that really illustrates the deep-rooted biases of AI because of the data that the algorithm was trained on. When it's trying to come up with a face that looks like a pixelated input image, you can see there of Obama, it defaults to white features. And again, on the COVID-19, I can feel like COVID-19 is throwing up many, many case studies for us. We looked at the tracking apps, and these are raising ethical concerns around privacy, obviously, as they use location tracking, but also equity, because not all persons have access to these smart devices. We also use some fictional case studies for example, if we're looking at politically sensitive contexts, we've developed some case studies around the impact of big tech in the global south and the developing world. And then we have just completed a case study in the area of human-computer interaction, looking at dark patterns. And dark patterns are user interface design choices that benefit an online service by steering or coercing a user into making sort of unintended decisions, be that to spend more money or give up some personal data. So as I say, we have a very wide range of case studies that we're developing, and they're being developed in a very sort of systematic manner. And it's really part of our ethos that these case studies should be, you know, applicable across many of the topics, so that you can reuse. For example, you know, something that we have there in AI and machine learning, the autonomous vehicles, could also be reused if you were teaching about, for example, software testing and so on. So a little bit about the development of the case studies. Each case study is developed by a research team of at least 2 partners from the Ethics for EU team. And each research team, we have one ethicist, at least one ethicist and one computer scientist. And we use a very iterative approach to development. We refine after evaluating the materials among the team of 2, with other team Ethics for EU team members, faculty, and with students. And we keep this kind of log of how the case study has evolved and developed and been refined over time. We've also developed an evaluation framework, quite a comprehensive framework for evaluating the case studies that we're focused on. And we evaluate our case studies along 5 dimensions. We're interested in developing in evaluating the content, of course, and our content evaluation is inspired by LARI, the Learning Object Review Instrument. And here we're interested in the content, the learning goal alignment, the presentation, and so on. In terms of usability, we're thinking about the ease of use of the case study. So the ease of use in bringing it, say, into an existing module. So say you have a module on AI and you want to use a case study. Is it easy to bring our case study into that? But also the ease of adaptation, because we don't imagine that, you know, these case studies will be available online for download. And I think it would be very unlikely that someone will just download it and use it as it is. You know, lecturers naturally want to kind of adapt content. So how easily is our material? How easy are our materials to adapt? We also conduct a series of expert interviews where we gather qualitative analysis on our case studies. And the lecturer who's delivering the content, we ask them to keep a reflective diary on delivering the content. So they have a diary sort of as they're creating the content, and then to reflect on how the delivery went down, how the students engaged with it, and come up with any pointers maybe for amendments or changes. And then we use a student survey afterwards to gather feedback on the content delivery. And we ask, I think, we ask kind of the standard questions from student questionnaires, but also around, did it stimulate your interest? Did it challenge you to think critically, and those kind of things. As I say, so we're going to create, the next step in our work is to really get the online portal up and running once our case studies have all been completely evaluated. So that will be coming online over the next couple of months. But this is a kind of this is what we have in our sandbox. Let's say this is what our case studies look like. As I say, they're very systematic, and they come in this kind of standard template. So when you access the case studies in the online repository, this is something like what you will see here: the case study and its associated materials, including sort of lectures, assignments, in-class or take-home activities, and any other related materials. So I'll talk very briefly. I think I'm probably coming to the end of my time, Viola, just checking here. Our intellectual outputs that are in progress. So to accompany the repository of case studies on the online portal, we will create an instructor guide for the teaching of ethics in computer science. I think one focus will certainly be on the difference in teaching technical subjects and in teaching ethics, and that's specifically to age computer science lecturers. As our survey showed, most of the people who deliver ethics are actually from a technical background. So we want to provide guidance on the mechanisms to raise ethical and moral questions, how to give students the opportunity to formulate answers, how to train students in justifying and explaining their answers using some kind of reasoning, and also the type of learning activities. So part of the learning activities that we have are often around, obviously case studies, discussion, role-playing activities, which wouldn't be widely used in computer science education. So giving educators and lecturers some instruction on those kinds of methods. And another planned intellectual output is our community of practice in computer science ethics. And as I say, I think today is really a starting point on that. We're very interested in interacting with people who are attending this event, and we very much welcome you to join our community of practice in computer science ethics. This kind of emphasis, I say, on a kind of this community of practice is really looking at sustained involvement of stakeholders and involving people in a project for the long term, because we want this to persist, I suppose, beyond the 3 year that the project is funded for. And this will allow, the virtual community of practice will be hosted sort of within the online repository that we're developing, and it will allow participants, I suppose, to discuss, to share, to develop their knowledge and experience in delivering, computer science ethics courses to students. We would, of course, want that, whoever's in our community of practice would use the materials that we're developing, maybe adapt them, and of course, contribute materials of their own. So as I say, we're working with Informatics Europe to establish a work group in this area. And the final intellectual output is a training program. So how, we're developing this training program as a train the trainer model. So it's for computer science educators to instruct them in the delivery of computer science ethics. And we're going to have a number of flavors of this training course. We'll have an online module, a blended learning module, and then a modular, what we call a CPD, continuing professional development module. So just to sum up, because I'm certainly coming to the end of the time, as I think everybody here knows, the existing or the emerging technologies are posing increasingly difficult ethical dilemmas. And what we really want to do in the Ethics for You project, our overarching aims, are to design and develop curricula that can integrate the teaching of computational methods with ethical reasoning skills. We feel there's been a gap there for a very long time. And rather than just, I suppose, kind of relaying information to students, we want to give them the experience via the case studies to identify, to confront, to work through ethical questions, and to give them, I suppose, the vocabulary and the terminology to raise these kind of ethical topics that they may confront in their careers as computer scientists. And I suppose, you know, as computer science students and particularly graduates, they're very much on the front line in this area. So we want to equip the graduates to produce, you know, to think about the technology that they're producing, and overall to produce technology that I suppose that is socially responsible and more beneficial to society. So that's where I'm going to end. I'll stop my screen share now. Viola.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dimna. So I guess we have just few minutes for questions, but then we will have plenty of time at the end. So any questions so far? So I see a question in the chat. How far are you with preparing the repository of case studies, and what do you see as the next step with it? Sharing or something like this?
Sure, yeah, I've got a strange view of the messages here. I'll get it. Yeah, so it's from Helen. Hi, Helen. So we have developed a range of case studies that I've just described there, and the goal was to evaluate them all this semester, which is coming to an end, and that has happened. So we have, I suppose, we have gone through the evaluation framework as I've put it out there. And we're probably in the phase now in terms of the content and in adapting it based on some of the feedback that we've got from expert evaluators and from students. So the content, I would say, is almost ready to go, and those case studies are there. The next step is to actually get the online repository up and running. So that will be happening over the next couple of months. We're currently sort of, you know, thinking about the design, we have a prototype of the system. We want to get the materials up there, but what's kind of interesting, I think, from us and what we're thinking about a lot is designing in the communities of practice element. So how will the community of practice interact with the materials that we're developing? But we would certainly hope that this would be online by the end of the summer.
Okay, thank you. Then we have one question from Severin.
Hi, so I'm Severin Katjanka from TU Munich, and we did some ethics teaching in practical courses in the past 2 semesters, and we found one problem that's a bit hard for us to solve. So we had one course where we had just German student and one kind of a mixed setup with international students. And one problem that we couldn't really solve is, like, when you have German students, it's comparably easy for them to talk about ethics because it's their natural language. They learn in school how to talk this. The moment you move it to English, which is inclusive and makes sense because many courses are mixed here at TU Munich as well, students have this problem that they can't express themselves, which is already a problem because they don't know the terms. Like if you throw the term normative at them or deontology at them, they are scared anyway. So it's something they are out of their comfort zone. I was wondering if you have any idea how to solve this problem of teaching international students. So usually you have a big, whatever, German, Swedish or whatever population who is comfortable talking one language, and suddenly you have other people with different backgrounds. Have you any experience in solving this problem or any hints?
Yeah, it's something we haven't, I suppose, come across so far because we've been teaching to a singular group of students, and it's actually a great point that you raised and something that we're absolutely going to have to think about in going forward. I think, you know, just thinking about it there off the top of my head, it certainly brings in the idea that we need obviously a sort of a background, almost like nearly like a cheat sheet or something, or even a mini module that outlines some of this very particular terminologies that are used. I mean, ethics, as you say, is a specific domain. It has a very specific set of terminologies. I feel like maybe Viola might have more experience in that. I don't know, Viola, if you want to come in there.
Yes, I have some experience, but then it's still difficult. And also I have to adapt it because we changed it. I come from Politecnico di Milano, and then we changed it some years ago from teaching in Italian to teaching in English. And then also as instructor, I mean, I had to change completely my approach, and but I think this is a huge issue. I cannot see any solution. Sometimes I feel that in changing the approach because of the change of the language, I totally missed some point. Then it's true that I also acquired new points, but I think it's this is very open. maybe we will discuss later.
I think it's a great point actually for us to consider in the project and in the instructor guide, for example, that we'll be developing.
Yes, and I know that there are some other questions, but I guess Christina Klaas will be the last question. I'm sorry, then save your question for later. So go ahead, Christina.
So thank you very much. I'm in a working group of information ethics from the German Computer Society, and we also develop case studies since many years. And so I have two questions mainly. The first one is just, do you plan also to make somehow a repository of other case study resources in Europe, and where do you get the information from? Because you say you want to create a community, and this could be interesting. And the other thing is your case studies are extremely carefully designed. So do you plan to give some recommendations how to adopt them for lecturers? Because sometimes when you adopt a case study, you might change the focus, and it might not be the same focus for the ethical dilemma than before. And the other thing, we are sometimes asked of getting solutions or answers, you know, some proposals for answers for our case studies. How do you deal with this issue? Do you give some proposals for answers for teachers, or do you say it's really mainly the method how to derive an answer, how to discuss this?
Okay, thank you for your question, Christina. Do we plan, the first part of it, do we plan on offering the case studies? Absolutely. I mean, we can't develop a case study for everything. We've got limited resources within the project. And, you know, I think one of the things will be part of the repository is also a link to, you know, all of the materials that we found as part of the project. Again, that will be a kind of a very live area. This is just, I suppose, uploading uploading information from the literature or the media. So I don't know if you're talking about a repository of other kind of developed or more structured case studies. I think we definitely would consider that. I suppose we would have some kind of constraints around using a template quite similar to our own, but I think we absolutely should be open to that, right? Because we can't, as I say, we can't develop every case study in the world, and you know, there are many people across Europe who are developing really interesting materials that we should use as part of the project. Yes, our case studies are quite carefully designed, and we follow this template. We will be giving guidelines on how to adapt. I suppose there's different levels of how people can interact. I suppose people can just download our material and do whatever they like with it, and we have no kind of control over that. But in terms of if people want to, you know, adapt a case study and then repost it on our repository, we will have some guidelines on how to do that, and to make that as easy as possible for the user. We also really want to capture, not just, we don't want, you know, so I reused your case study and here's what I did and I just posted back up. We want to capture the rationale around why people changed it, why they adapted, what context were they using in it, did they work well? So there's kind of two parts. There'll be the very structured case study and then another mechanism to capture the rationale around reusing the case study and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank you again, Dimna, and please save your questions for the last part of the day. So let me reshare my screen and go to present our next speaker, who is Julia Mann. Julia Mann works at the Health, Ethics and Policy Lab at ETH. She is a health communication scholar with extensive experience and training in qualitative and participatory research methods. Her research interests span a broad range of topics at the intersection of digital health technologies, bioethics, and health communications. And in particular, Julia, in her current work, investigates the opportunities and challenges of medical AI, focusing on the ethical implications for research and clinical practice. And today, Julia will present on striving for interdisciplinarity on evolving roles and finding common grounds in digital health. So, Julia, go ahead, and thank you for having accepted our invitation. You can share now your screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this nice introduction. I will turn off my video because I had some issues with my internet connection.
No problem.
So just to be sure that we don't get interrupted. So let me share my screen.
Okay,
Perfect.
I think everything is fine.
Okay, great, wonderful. So hello and welcome also from my side. I would first of all like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me. I would also like to thank Dimna for this excellent talk, which I found incredibly exciting and really got me very engaged in this topic. So at this point, also maybe a short disclaimer. So originally I had planned a stronger focus on digital health, but since I wasn't sure about who will be attending today's event, I decided to broaden the focus a bit. So the goal of my presentation is to draw your attention to the importance of interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary collaboration in technology, and specifically the integration of ethics. I also want to touch upon the role of ethics education and provide you with some examples and some of my own experiences that I consider relevant in this context. Something that I also want to highlight here, and I think Dimna has also mentioned this, there's quite some work going on and quite a lot of interest on the ethics of artificial intelligence. But I think it's very important to consider that there's also other important areas like interface development, computer games, which have a fair share of ethical issues to be considered. But of course, since my own work is also on the ethics of artificial intelligence, this is also my background. But I think it's important to not forget these other fields that need to be considered. So next, maybe briefly about myself. Actually, Viola has already done a very nice introduction. Maybe to add on to this, the kind of data that I work with. So I carry out interviews, facilitate focus group discussions, hold interactive workshops. So this is just to highlight that the kind of data that I use in my work may be very different from the kind of data that many of you as computer scientists work with. And while I don't have a formal ethics education, it is something that I've always been very interested in. And obviously, as a health communication scholar, someone working in healthcare with patients and healthcare professionals, ethics is somehow really ingrained in my training. So my research is really on digital health technologies, how technologies like AI-powered clinical decision support systems or health-related smartphone apps can shape things like our perceptions, our behaviors, decision-making, but also how they impact relationships in healthcare. And also importantly, what impact they have on fundamental ethical values in healthcare and medicine. I'm also very interested to explore how these technological developments in healthcare affect vulnerable and marginalized groups. So thinking about people with disabilities that may have trouble with like limited functioning, for example, or visual disabilities, and also people with low health literacy skills, low data literacy skills. So I think these are really some of the interests that have come out in my recent work. I also think it's worth mentioning that I work in an academic environment that may be different from the private sector in many ways. Something that I also think is relevant is that I teach ethics to medical students at the undergrad level here at ETH. I actually never taught ethics to computer scientists, but I was very intrigued by the theme of today's event. And also after hearing the excellent presentation by Dimna, I'm even more excited about this topic. And I'm thinking that actually much can be learned from teaching ethics in medicine and teaching ethics in computer science. And thinking about it, this would have also made for quite an interesting talk. So yeah, but this is just maybe to give you some more context on where I'm coming from. Next, I don't want to spend too much time talking to you about digital transformation. I think this is something that you're certainly aware of and that is not new to you. But what I want to say and what I think is important is that this move towards more digital has really fundamentally changed the role of computing professionals, of data scientists, of data engineers. Our life is dominated by technologies. It influences how and with whom we communicate, how we work, how we travel, how we do our shopping. Some of these areas we might not even be aware of, like technology is just so pervasive, it's everywhere. And sometimes we might even forget. This is to say that the technologies that are being developed have a real world impact once they are unleashed into society. And sometimes there are unintended consequences. And sometimes we're too focused on the promise and the hope and the opportunities, and we forget to consider these unintended consequences. So who benefits from technologies and who might be left behind? An important aspect here, I think, is also to consider scope. Technologies usually don't reach only a handful of people, but they may be adopted by hundreds and thousands of people. So they really shape society. Taking the example of healthcare, if you have a doctor, say a biased doctor, then a doctor with prejudice, then his patients will suffer from this. But if it's an algorithm, then the scope is just so much, the impact is just so much greater. And this is to say that I think there's really great power in computer science, and this comes with great responsibility. There's been actually quite some instances more recently where I heard people say, I'm just an engineer. I'm just the one building the system. I'm not a doctor. I don't do patients. I focus on the technical issues. And yes, I mean, it's true. Developers can obviously not do all the heavy lifting. Technology really requires input from domain experts. It requires interdisciplinary and interprofessional teams. In the field of healthcare, for example, it is crucial to understand hospital workflows, procedures, in order to develop technical solutions that are actually accepted by healthcare professionals and that meet the needs, the clinical needs, that provide utility to clinicians and patients. Interoperability, for example, is a huge issue here. It's also important to understand attitudes towards these technologies. It has to do with empowerment and disempowerment, with autonomy, and not only on the patient side, but also on the clinician side. And I think these ethical values that guide clinical care and decision-making are something that really needs to be considered also by the engineers behind these health technologies. So what I'm trying to say is that technology is really always embedded in a value system, be it healthcare or be it in law, be it in HR. So there are various fields, but there's always a value system. And there are ethical considerations that go hand in hand with it. Interdisciplinary collaboration is, of course, nothing new, but I think the digital transformation has really amplified the need for such collaborations, specifically with the involvement of computer scientists and developers. I mean, taking the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic as an example, we don't only need medicine, but also social sciences, ethics, and computer science at the table to solve these issues. So each discipline really brings their unique perspective, skills, and knowledge that can help us to tackle challenges like digital contact tracing, to allow us to ask the right questions, to evaluate different scenarios, and to weigh ethical arguments by really having this comprehensive and inclusive perspective. So the core message is really that technology is always about people and contexts. And while computer scientists are obviously not expected to be all-rounders and experts in everything, we cannot all become lawyers and doctors. And but I think that computer scientists should and can no longer hide behind the technologies they're developing. They have become key players in healthcare, in law, in banking, marketing, and any other field basically you can imagine. And they need to ask themselves, and I think Dimna has also mentioned this point, it's not only can I develop the solution, but should I? Is this really something that we should pursue? And sort of what are the benefits and risks? I mean, with digital contact tracing, you can say there's great benefits for public health, but then you have issues related to privacy. So it's really about these ethical dilemmas when there's actually two values that are called for, two actions that are called for, but they're in disagreement. So sort of resolving and being aware of these ethical dilemmas and conflicts is something that I consider very important. So to develop technological solutions for the challenges of our time, we really need interdisciplinary collaboration. When I think about interdisciplinarity, this is a picture that always comes to my mind. Some of you may know it, the infamous elephant. I think it really nicely illustrates that if we blindly stick to what we know and don't talk to others around us, so we really operate in our disciplinary silos, we risk missing the big picture. And while working with people from different disciplines is certainly an enriching experience, and I mean, I can speak from my own experience that I very much enjoy working in interdisciplinary environments, it also brings about various challenges. Because rooted in our socialization as professionals, we have learned to appreciate different values and priorities. We have gotten used to certain ways of thinking, framing problems, and we also adopt certain strategies to tackle these problems. So it's really about different approaches to problems and problem solving. And sometimes we speak an entirely different language, it seems. And language was also something that was addressed earlier in the questions. And I think this is even a more substantial issue that relates to the disciplinary languages. And combined, of course, if you combine it with English, Italian, German, then it just complicates issues even further. So yeah, getting everyone in the same room, getting everybody at the same table can already be very challenging. But then facilitating this inclusive dialogue is, I think, a whole different story. Because the idea is, of course, to create really this space for mutual understanding, mutual learning, so learning from one another, and to co-create new knowledge that can be translated into technological solutions. But yeah, as I said, like sometimes even finding this common language that is understandable to all can be very, very challenging. So terms that computer scientists may be very familiar with, they might be completely unknown to someone outside of computer science, or worse, they might actually have a very different meaning to them. So integrating expertise from various domains is not simple. It requires all those involved to be open for dialogue and discussion. And the pressure of deadlines, be it in publication deadlines or product launch, these deadlines certainly don't make things easier. And as a result of these challenges and interdisciplinary differences, it's sometimes really difficult to find this common ground. And sometimes people might end up working side by side, but never truly exchange or collaborate. And some of you may have experienced this in projects, that you're working on the same project, but you're working side by side because it's just so difficult to integrate your experience and your interests and in an academic environment, the kind of journals that you want to publish in, or the kind of research that you want to do, the kind of data that you want to collect. And yeah, it ends up everyone does what they do best and what they're interested in, but this dialogue somehow gets lost. A problem that we witness more and more, I think, is that ethics as a discipline is often overlooked. Certainly not with bad intentions, because actually I think when you ask people about it, most people will agree that it is important, but maybe just not a priority, or they see it as something that becomes relevant only once problems arise. So yeah, we can talk about ethics, but only like if there are issues. So really this reactive approach. I mean, I don't want to go too much into the details about ethics washing here, but of course, tokenism is a real problem. So only this symbolic act of, yes, we care about ethics. And the fact is that ethics often ends up being a tag that's added at the very beginning or at the very end of a project. So it's more in a checklist kind of manner. Yes, we did ethics. Yes, there was an ethicist involved. But I feel that often it is not embedded throughout the process, nor is it taken very seriously. And that's why I have to say I was very, very impressed by the case studies that were presented earlier, because this really shows this effort that's, I think, ongoing, and that's a trend to really integrate ethics more into existing curricula in teaching. I mean, we've talked about some of the recent headlines, and when reading some of these headlines, it becomes clear that ethics doesn't always get a seat at the table. Big tech has gotten quite some bad press recently, and we've heard about other case studies. This is actually just a very small selection. And yeah, I have to say, as a researcher, but most of all as a technology user myself, as someone who uses social media, someone who does online shopping, as someone who, I don't know, uses travel apps, reading these headlines makes me worry about the future. It's scary. The funny thing about this is that I've actually often been told that ethicists tend to focus on the negative and fail to appreciate the opportunities that novel technologies offer. And I mean, thinking about healthcare, of course, there are manifold opportunities. So I think it's important to consider them. And I think some of us, me included, are guilty of focusing maybe too much on the limitations and potential pitfalls of technologies. I think that's something also about self-awareness. But there is just already so much hype around opportunities and promises that I really think it needs a critical voice to raise some of the uncomfortable questions, maybe. But as pointed out earlier, I think also the role of developers and data scientists is evolving, with many of them becoming increasingly interested and self-critical and conscious of the impact of their work. So I think this is really a trend, and with initiatives like the Ethics for EU, I think we can really promote and foster this critical thinking and awareness. Yeah, how can we make sure that these critical voices are heard and promote technological advance that takes ethical considerations account? I mean, I said it, education is key, and I think it's been highlighted before. We've heard about the Ethics for EU project, and I mean, I have to say, I don't think it's necessarily about becoming an ethics expert, but it's about creating appreciation for it and for those dealing with the non-technical aspects of technology. And this can be ethicists, can be psychologists, can be communication scholars. So it's really about sort of this appreciation for the non-technical, and specifically, I think, the ethical implications. It's also about creating empathy. It's about cultivating critical thinking skills. And these are skills, and I think maybe a general mindset that will have a positive impact way beyond the educational setting. So also when you think that future generations of computing professionals go into the industry, the private sector, and work for companies like the big tech, like Google, Facebook, Amazon, I think this is really an investment in the future. Another important point that I think is worth mentioning is the following. So when we think about education, we tend to immediately think about schools and universities. And those are, of course, places where learning takes place. We can take these platforms to prepare future generations of computing professionals. But I think we also need to consider other avenues. So including online education, for example, boot camps. In fact, I think there are many computing professionals who are self-taught. So I think these are really aspects to consider, or professional development for executives. So to really also extend beyond this traditional education context. I think with COVID-19, it has even increased. Like online education has received such a push. But yeah, teaching ethics is certainly not an easy task. It takes time and effort. But thinking back at the headlines and the case studies we discussed or heard about today, I think we can all agree that it's about time that ethics gets a more prominent role within the computer science curriculum. And I think we're actually on, if I see like how this project is evolving, I think it's great to see that we're well on our way. So as I mentioned earlier, I actually never taught ethics to computer scientists, but I can tell you about my own experience of working with them. So as part of a Horizon 2020 project on predictive modeling in stroke, I have the great privilege to work alongside a team of brilliant medical researchers and data scientists from across Europe. Actually, also some of them also based at TU Dublin. Something that I was really struggling with, I guess, at the beginning of the project was how to engage our project partners in the type of ethical discussions that I felt were much needed. Like again, this finding common ground and sort of raising awareness. And while discussions were very technical, it was difficult sort of to get the ethical aspects in to find room for them. So it took some time, but now I feel we're well on our way. Last year, we actually set up a deliberative dashboard to provide our project partners with a forum to facilitate exchange and discussion on the ethical issues that arise within the project. This platform provides, it's kind of a resource. I mean, it provides a curated list of resources, so newspaper articles, but also scientific publications, information about conferences, and it also has an interactive forum. As a kind of follow-up to this, because we realized that the forum is not really used that much, we decided to try a different approach. So as a kind of follow-up, we're currently running a workshop series that aims to advance our thinking about the ethical implications of the project and also to identify suitable mitigation strategies. Because so many times it's not only about, like, there are issues and they cannot be solved by technology. So for the purpose of this, we're using a collaborative whiteboard, and the idea is to really create a living document for the project where we discuss these ethical issues. So something that we can also access at later points in time. So this approach is really to engage project partners in co-designing ethical guidelines for predictive modeling in stroke. So it really has this co-design element to it, participatory element. I have to say I'm overwhelmed by the positive response and the stimulating discussions we're having. It's really interesting to uncover different role perceptions within the project, so how data scientists see themselves, and sort of to understand also how they view their role and their responsibilities more generally, maybe. And also to encourage them, obviously, to think about their role and their responsibilities. Engaging with the ethical implications of their work may be a step outside of their comfort zone for some, but the feedback that I've received so far is really great, and I'm happy to say that I truly feel we're establishing common ground throughout this exchange. Another example I'd like to give you is more from the educational context. So it's the ETH Ethics Resource Platform. It's a project that's actually led by one of my colleagues here at ETH. The platform is an evolving collection of tools and resources, online courses aimed at students and lecturers to foster and promote ethics education at ETH Zurich across departments. So this is not only aimed at computer science, but really across departments. So from business to architecture. And currently is unfortunately only accessible to members of the ETH domain. So the idea is that students can use it for self-study, or that lecturers can use some of the resources. So for example, case studies as also some of the resources are case studies, and to integrate those into their courses. But the project is still at an early stage, so I can unfortunately not yet share any concrete outcomes or evaluations with you. Then also in preparation for this talk, I have to say I did some research, and I stumbled upon the Embedded Ethics Initiative at Harvard University that maybe some of you may be familiar with. And what I think is really unique about it is that it's a true collaborative effort between computer science and philosophy. So instead of creating entirely new courses, ethical reasoning is really integrated into existing computer science courses within the main curriculum. So I think it's like the Ethics for EU project. I think it takes a very, very similar approach. And I'm so happy to see these kind of teaching methods and this integration taking place, because I think it's crucial. And then there are also some other initiatives I would like to highlight that I'm aware of through my own work, mainly on the Horizon 2020 project that I was mentioning. So the EU is funding several projects in the field of digital ethics. And I think the findings and resources developed out of these efforts can also inform future teaching of ethics for computing professionals. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And yeah. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. So I think we have some minutes for questions. Any question? Okay, I don't see questions now, but I
would have a question if
okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Julia, for that talk. It was really, really interesting. One of the things that you sort of mentioned there, and I'd love to hear more about, is your work on co-design, particularly in the stroke project. I think co-design is a really excellent sort of, we're talking mostly about teaching here, but in terms of a research methodology for drawing out ethical issues, you're actually bringing the designers and the developers into the same room as the end users of the product. Would you be able to talk a little bit about the co-design process for the stroke project and your sort of insights into that?
Hello.
Hi,
sorry,
Julia.
That was my connection.
No problem.
Apologies.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
No problem. I was saying thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting, and I know that we're talking a lot here, obviously about teaching ethics, but obviously ethics in research is another issue. But one of the things you mentioned in your talk was that you employed a co-design mechanism in the stroke project, and I assume there you were bringing developers, data scientists into the same room as stroke patients, I imagine. And I think this is such an enlightening way of uncovering some of the issues that potential users would have in the system, and the ethical issues as well. Would you be able to talk us through a little bit of some of your findings or your insights from the co-design?
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the process. So actually, COVID sort of makes the situation a bit more difficult. So all the collaboration is taking place online. Actually, the basis for the collaborative whiteboard that I was talking about are interviews that I conducted with healthcare professionals in the field of stroke, stroke survivors and caregivers. So to identify their ethical priorities, and that informed the setup of the whiteboard. And the whiteboard currently is only accessible to project partners. So the idea is to really start developing this ethical framework. And then at a later point, it would definitely be interesting to, again, get healthcare professionals, stroke survivors, and caregivers to also chip in again and to sort of like add their comments on how this has evolved.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Okay, I have a question, but I don't want to take the time. So if Anybody? Okay, I see another question in the chat. Is it possible to teach ethics as a separate course like critical thinking or technical writing?
I think ethics is often taught as a separate course, and critical thinking certainly is part of it. I also have to say I'm not an expert on teaching ethics to computer science, I guess. But from my personal impression and also what has been discussed, I think it's really about integrating it to provide students with relatable examples. So to have it not on an abstract level of discussing ethical principles where it's difficult to make the connection between their work and these ethical principles. So if you remain on a too abstract level, I think it will be very hard, and it might end up being, like I said, a tag at the end. Yeah, I've done my ethics, but I don't see how it relates to the work that I do. So that's why I think the approach to really integrate it is maybe the preferable option.
And if I can add something, of course, this integration can be translated into different ways of integration. You can have a real integrated courses with maybe instructors coming from different fields. Then you can have an integration within a particular course. So I think that the issue of integration can be translated into different ways. But I think it's one of the challenges that we need to consider for the future. So Michele Loi is
hi, Viola.
to ask you a question. Hi.
So on the question of integration, just a reflection. I think that one big problem is that so far philosophers of science have been within philosophy those who have the most developed field within philosophy, where in a sense it makes sense for their own discipline to talk about the issues of science as they're interesting for the scientists. Of course, they don't do just that. There's a huge part of epistemology and philosophy and science discussion that is quite abstract from scientific practice, but there is space for that. So I think that the challenge for ethics is to, in a sense, integrate philosophy of science much more with ethics, because you need a reformulation of the ethical problems that make sense immediately within the context of scientific practice, in a sense, if you want to achieve this integration. And I think this is a special challenge because you can be, it's extremely difficult to be a very good ethicist and a very good philosopher of science, or to understand the science, to understand how the ethical problem emerges from the science. So when philosophers of science do that, sometimes they're a bit naive about ethics, and when people like me from ethics, political philosophy do it, we tend to be a bit naive about the philosophy of science involved. So it's also, I think, this problem of a closer integration between ethics and philosophy of science is necessary to better integrate ethics within the scientific practice.
So I mean, I agree with you. I don't know if Julia wants to add something to this.
No, I think it's a very important point to really integrate into. I think this also relates to this aspect of interdisciplinarity, so that we should really broaden our thinking and broaden the interactions that we have with even within our disciplines. Actually, we have people working on different like the same topic but in different ways. So I think it's really about being open to this discussion.
Okay, and I can see from Gonzalo a question. I don't know if you can read it, Julia, or I can read it for you.
As it in?
It's about ethical relativism. Do you think ethical relativism is a main challenge in this kind of courses?
I mean, that's actually a very interesting point. It's something that also in when teaching ethics to the medical students, that's often a point that they say, well, I mean, it's just my personal opinion. But I think the point is to really develop ethical arguments. So you need to somehow support your view. Just saying I'm against something or I'm for something, that of course is not the way to do it properly. It requires language. I think it's really about, this issue was also raised earlier, it's about providing students with the terms and the concepts to enable them to really engage in this dialogue with one another and to formulate and to articulate their arguments.
Okay, and if I can read another question from Christina. What is your approach to solving the issue of the coded bias of the health professionals, general information available, differences in stroke symptoms in males and females, differences in data sets available in different populations? Do you have any extra ethics training to address the issue?
So wait, let me read the question.
Yes, sorry.
Quite a long question. Yeah, I mean, I think the first point is, I mean, first of all, to be mindful that there is bias and the data might be biased, or that it's unbalanced data. So that, for example, certain populations are overrepresented while others are underrepresented. I mean, some of the challenges also relate, of course, to data harmonization. So how to ensure that when you have data sets from different countries, so the language that you can actually work with these data sets. And any extra ethics training to address these issues. You mean ethics training for, I'm not sure what the, for data providers. Not that I'm aware of. I think the data providers, but I think that's a very very important aspect. I mean, we all know that physicians' behavior is somehow baked into the data. That's something I think that's very obvious. But yeah, I think that raises a very, very important point. Yeah, thank you.
And let me take just one more question from Boris. May we say that the main way to teach ethics is by doing or by following an example pattern?
I mean, I think it's a good entry point. I think I mean, speaking from my experience with medical students, I think you need to provide them in the beginning with a framework and a basis, because otherwise I think it's just incredibly difficult, especially like talking about medical students at the undergrad level. So yeah, I think it needs some sort of example and pattern, and then you can branch out and maybe also, I mean, there's different ethical theories, different approaches, but I think it's important to start with one thing. That's I'm not sure if Dimna maybe.
I mean, these are huge issues, so it's really difficult to just summarize them. And also, I think we already collected many elements, as Paul suggested, for our next panel about all the elements that Julia suggested. So let me thank you again, Julia, for this excellent talk. And thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Our hands. So now we will have a break and we'll go back 10:50. Okay. And 10:50 we will have our panel. Okay. So see you in 20 minutes. Thank you again, Julia, and thank you again, Dimna.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you.